Hannah Murray on TRE in the afternoon.
Joining us on the line now is Katy Hessel. She's an art historian, broadcaster and curator dedicated to celebrating women artists from all over the world. She's the host of the Great Women Artists podcast and author of the bestselling The Story of Art Without Men. There is now an illustrated guide aimed at readers aged 8 to 14. Welcome to the show, Katy.
Hello, it's great to be here.
Oh, it's lovely to have you with us. So tell me how you became an art historian.
So I became an art historian, firstly, out of my love of art history. I was very lucky. I grew up in London where the museums are free. And so on a Saturday afternoon, my sister would take me to museums and we'd go in half term and we'd bring our sketchbooks. And I'd kind of learn about art that way. It came from just copying my sister, essentially. And then I realized you could study it for A-level, which was the best thing ever because you could just look at pictures all day and talk about them. And then I went to university. I did a degree, and then I sort of had a backdoor way into art history, the art world, because while I worked at galleries full time throughout my 20s, I also started an Instagram account, which was called Great Women Artists, where I would find a woman artist every single day and write about her on Instagram. And it really sort of fueled my knowledge because I started this Instagram out of a lack of knowledge, really, and a frustration of not seeing any women artists on the wall of an art fair that I went to when I was 21. And so I sort of thought that I'd do what any aspiring millennial art historian would do and begin an Instagram account. And it kind of all went from there.
Amazing. Isn't it weird how in so many aspects of history, the women seem to be erased? It's not that they weren't there. It's just that nobody talks about them or focuses on them. It's quite bizarre.
It is. And whenever people say, if you could go back in time, what would you ask people? I'd ask people, what were they thinking? Because in certain situations in the 19th century, especially, art dealers would actually cross out a woman artist's name and replace it with a male artist's name because it could sell for more money. And that means, we're discovering the most amazing artists today. So, for example, at the Royal Academy here in London, we've just opened an amazing show about an artist called Michelina Vautier. And she was an artist based in Belgium and in the 1600s. And it was only 30 years ago that this amazing art historian was in the museum basement when she was looking for a work by Jan van Eyck, who was a male artist of the era, that she came across this giant work and she said to her colleague, "Who's that by?" And he says, "Oh, some woman." And she was like, "Wait, hang on a second." And so for the last 30 years, assembling all these works from around the world, going on live radio to be like, has anyone seen this work? And people have come back to her. And now there's this amazing exhibition at the Royal Academy. And so just shows that, and people are kind of, bowling over it. Amazing reviews in the Times, the Guardian, you name it. And it's just like, it's not like we want to sort of exclude anyone. It's just the fact that when you see art history from a broader perspective, it becomes so much more exciting and richer.
Definitely. And I think the sad reality is most people, unless they've studied art and have a particularly keen interest in art, if you were asked to name 5 artists, most people wouldn't name a woman. I mean, maybe they could name 1 or 2 women, but that they wouldn't spring to mind necessarily, which is really sad.
I know, which is, why I sort of dedicated my life to this. And now when I've now written a book for younger readers and I've been going into schools every day in the last few weeks. And I always begin my sessions by saying, has anyone heard of any artists? And, people say Van Gogh and they say Leonardo da Vinci. Maybe they might say Frida Kahlo, Damien Hirst or whatever. And I say great. And then we continue talking about our love of art. And then two thirds through, I say, do you remember at the beginning of the session where everyone told me who their favourite artists were? And so many of those names were male. And so, it's really saying, let's kind of get them young. Let's introduce people to because that's the thing, we go off of what we've been taught. We go to museums to learn. And so, but if the National Gallery in London has only dedicated 1% of its collection to women, then how are we going to know about these women artists? So we have to sort of do our own research in a way.
Yeah. So, you're obviously coming across artists all the time. Is it a mixture of modern female artists who are still alive and producing art now, as well as going back over the centuries and finding forgotten artists?
Yes, so my books range from the last 500 years. We begin in Renaissance Italy and we end in the present day. And again, because for me, I'm excited by art and artists, and I love to know how someone saw the world 500 years ago, 300 years ago, but also today. You know, why I love art history is because it charts the history of the world through an individual's perspective. It shows how someone was feeling or what they experienced at a certain time, how they understood a story, how they saw the world, what happened in their life. And when we look at art, we not only sort of understand someone else's perspective, we give time to that. We sort of, practice our kind of empathy or sympathetic kind of traits, but also we can learn and we can marvel at their distinctive ways of creating beauty. You know, why did we look at abstract art in the early 20th century? Why did art suddenly change in the 19th to the early 20th century? Because of the Industrial Revolution, because high-speed trains were invented, the phone was invented, the camera was invented. And so, you know, when we look at art history, it's also telling us a much bigger story about what's happening in the world at that time as well.
Yeah, I bet a lot of people don't even think that. You know what I mean? I mean, you can tell, obviously, you're so beautifully passionate about what you do and understand the importance of art in relation to history. And I bet a lot of people don't make that connection. You know, it's just a painting. It's just a depiction of people having a cup of coffee at a cafe, and won't resonate whether it's in the 18th century or the 19th century. But of course, how people would sit down and enjoy a cup of coffee would have changed over hundreds of years.
You are right. And also, to your point, I'd also add that, you know, oftentimes when we think about who's gotten to be able to be immortalized in art, it's often people who are of very high status, very grand, you know, have sort of gorgeous, gleaming gold ruffs or coats or something. And actually, they don't feel very relatable. And actually, what I like to do in my books is show that there are artists from all different parts of society. The artist who I'm most influenced by is actually an American painter called Alice Neel, who worked from 1900 to 1984. And why I love her and why I find her groundbreaking is because throughout from the 30s to the 80s, she painted everyone who lived and shaped New York City, from her landlord's son Benjamin to her friends, the artist Andy Warhol. And it's, you know, it's about kind of including everyone in this subject, because art history is for everyone. And the more people we have talking about it, the more people we have making it, the more exciting it will be.
Yeah. And I'm glad you mentioned her, because I was going to ask you for some names that we should look up and look into. So she's one of your favourites, is she?
Totally. And you know why I love her is because she paints the reality of what the world is. You know, it's like food. We're so lucky in the world today that we can try all different types of food. It would be boring if we had the same thing every single day for tea. Do you know what I mean? So with art, it's the same thing. We need to sort of enrich our minds. And that's what Alice Neel does. She shows me all the people, and actually you feel more valid to tell your story. And that's kind of what I want to do with this book, with the story of Art Without Men, especially the illustrated guide to amazing women artists, is because I want children to feel like they belong in these spaces. Museums are intimidating. They're these great sort of neoclassical buildings that have giant ceilings and they all feel very austere, sometimes carpeted walls or something. But actually, it's up to you to use them how you like. And I always say to, you know, parents always ask me, how do I bring my kid to a museum and not let them get bored? I say, well, you know, give them a test. Say to them, go and find all the cats in the paintings in the gallery, or go and find all the paintings with someone wearing a red shoe, or you know what I mean? Like, there are so many ways of, you don't have to sort of know all the important historical fact. It's not about that. We can use museums and galleries and art how we like. I wrote a book last year called How to Live an Artful Life, and that charts, it's sort of a quote by an artist or writer for every single day of the year. And it's about how artists can help your everyday, you know, whether it's thinking about love or thinking about family or thinking about beginnings or time or memory, grief. Art is for absolutely everyone and everything.
Yeah. You made a really good point about the museums. I remember as a kid, my parents really enjoying museums and me wishing I did, but not really as much as I...
Straight to the gift shop.
Yeah, exactly. You know, and a lot of it was because it was unrelatable. It seemed something that wasn't really relevant to you and your life. And yeah, it's all about how it's portrayed. And if you've got the right teacher or people that you're visiting the museums with to try and make it more fun and interactive, that can make all the difference.
Totally. And, think about when we were at school, the subjects that we loved were all about the teachers. And actually, museums do an amazing job today, promoting art. And actually, I've just worked with the National Portrait Gallery because my Story of Art Without Men Trail is going to come out next week. And so, it sort of gives kids a crossword. It gets them to sort of do a treasure hunt, find the women artists in the collection. And actually, when you kind of do that spotlighting on certain artists, people are kind of more drawn to, saying what they think or thinking, okay, well, it can be so overwhelming. Sometimes going into an art gallery is but like going to a sort of pharmacy where you think, oh my God, there are too many products to look at. And actually maybe just start with one and see where it goes from there. Do you know what I mean? Everything can feel too much, but actually artists can really help us to learn how to look. And also there are just the most amazing stories from history as well, especially when it comes to women artists, because, there's this one story of an artist called Clara Peters in my book who was around in the 1600s. And what you think is she's created, when you look at her work, what you think is sort of still life. Actually, she's hidden in tiny reflections in the goblets, 10 self-portraits. So there's stuff like that as well,
Wow.
Get the kind of eye senses looking and hunting and decoding. Be a detective when it comes to art history.
Yeah, lovely. And how did you go? Because the Story of Art Without Men was a best-selling book for adults. How did you go about, apart from the illustration, turning it into a children's book?
So, I mean, the thing is that I had to sort of do lots of research as I went into lots of schools, and I took some kids around Tate Britain every weekend. I lured them with pencil cases, etc. And, I sort of wanted to get to know what they thought. And I think what I noticed the most was you have to treat children as equal to you. You cannot be patronizing. You cannot be condescending at all. You have to treat them as if they were exactly the same age as you, and you have to give them agency. You also have to keep them busy as well. So, for example, on every single chapter of my book, there's an art task. So, for example, if I'm teaching you about the work of Yoko Ono, who was all about creating collective portraits of hope, but also using materials that were very cheap, such as her wish trees, when she gets her viewer to make a wish, write it down on a piece of paper, hang it on a tree nearby, tell your friends to do the same. It's that kind of thing. So it's making sure kids are kept incentivized, but also informed. And also I think that whole don't speak down to them, they are so clever. When I took kids around, I was astounded by their intelligence. And it really taught me something about never, ever daring to underestimate a child. They are the absolute future. And it's our duty to kind of leave this world in a better place from how we found it. And the next generation, everything.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And what kind of questions were they asking you then when you were taking them around the museum?
Well, they were sort of, oh, who's that? Or, coming up with all sort of amazing stories as well. I'd say to them, how do you think this woman looks in this picture? And sometimes we'd look at a kind of gaunt image of a woman from the 19th century and they go, depressed. And you know what? You're not wrong. Or, she's just confused. Why is she confused? Well, maybe she's looking the other way because she just proposed to her husband, but he said no. So now she's thinking about something else. And you're like, what? Okay, fantastic. It's like these stories, you just never know what they're going to come up with. But it was actually really it was when I took some kids around Tate Britain and we looked at the Chrysophylle mural that's dedicated to the tragic fire of Grenfell Tower in 2017, which honours Khadija Say, an amazing artist who sadly lost her life. I was a bit worried. I said, do you think it's all right if I say to the parents, do you think it's all right if I show them this? And the kids knew everything. They said, this is an injustice. And I was like, my God, you're so intelligent. And it was that moment that everything switched. And I thought, you know what, this is a real kind of, I've got a responsibility here.
Yeah, how amazing! Because kids get a bad rap, don't they, in the media? So much, this generation and lazy and all that kind of stuff. And so lovely that you got the other experience.
Yes, and I think it's to give them time and agency, and that's what art can do, because there's no right or wrong answer. And actually, they come up with all sorts of things. And I say, if you're a sports fan, there's art about that. If you like climate awareness, there's art about that. And so there's absolutely art for everyone. And also I think the mission of the book is to say it's not to exclude anyone. I've been going into tons of boys' schools, and it's not to say that men don't belong in art history at all. It's to say that if you see something that's missing, call it out.
Yeah.
So that's what I hope the kids will also take away from that.
Definitely. Well, it's a fabulous idea for a book, and it is beautifully illustrated as well, which is really nice to see. So the book is called The Story of Art Without Men, an illustrated guide to amazing women artists, and it's available on our website, tre.radio. It's by Katy Hessel, who we've been chatting with. Katy, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks. Have a great day.
You too.